To just say her topic is a woman's life in a Muslim country. Please welcome Dr. Taslima Nasrin.
Hello, everyone. Bill, thank you so much for inviting me to attend this atheist conference. I now get the privilege to meet the great humanists, secularists, great scientists, and great thinkers. Most of you probably do not know who I am. I was born in a country which was recently in the international news because of the collapse of a factory building which killed more than 1,000 poor workers. Most of them were women. I was born in Bangladesh, the world's third largest Muslim majority nation that had a big secular uprising a few months ago, despite the threats of Islamic fundamentalists. The secular movement of Bangladesh was called Shahbag movement. Many people tried to compare Shahbag movement with Egypt's Tahrir Square movement. But Shahbag was not really like Tahrir. Tahrir movement was against a corrupt dictator. Shahbag movement was against Islamic fundamentalists. The Islamists have gained unbelievable strength in Bangladesh over the years. They have been showing off their strength by harassing, abusing, stabbing, and murdering anyone who protests against their atrocities. They stabbed and killed atheist bloggers, the organizers of the secular Shahbag movement. Islamists have also taken to the tactic of calling all the bloggers and protesters at Shahbag atheists. This has scared the young protesters at Shahbag. Most of the protesters considered themselves Muslims, but they joined Shahbag movement with no bigger and better agenda than merely to ask for the hanging of war criminals. War criminals are those Islamists of Bangladesh who were the collaborators of Pakistani army in 1971, when Bangladesh had a war against Pakistan. War criminals were against the independence of a secular Bangladesh from Pakistan, the Islamic Republic. They killed and tortured and raped Bengalis during the war. Many secularists at Shahbag movement demanded banning of Jamaat-e-Islami, the political party of Islamists. Even though I do not support the death penalty of war criminals, as I am against the death penalty, I supported the banning of Jamaat-e-Islami party. And again, even though I support democracy, I am for the banning of Jamaat-e-Islami because Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh is nothing but a terrorist organization. Islamists do not believe in democracy. Their main aim is to bring theocracy and bury democracy and secularism forever. Now that the Islamists have called moderate or progressive Muslims atheists, many of the progressive Muslims are now falling over themselves trying to prove they are pious Muslims. Therefore, instead of saying some of the bloggers who are atheists have the right to be atheists and they have the right to criticize religion, but no one has the right to kill them, just like no one has the right to kill religious people for being religious. The so-called liberal and secular people are saying Jamaat-e-Islami goons are trying to prove that bloggers are atheists, but they are not atheists, they are good people. As if atheists are not good people. It is very alarming that the word atheist is being considered as a filthy, obscene word in Bangladesh, and the liberal people refrain from doing anything in support of the freedom of expression of atheists. They must know that Islam should not be exempt from the critical scrutiny that applies to other religions as well. In their mind, They must understand that Islam has to go through an enlightenment process similar to what other religions have already gone through by questioning the inhuman, unequal, unscientific, and irrational aspects of religion. If the secular movement in Bangladesh cannot make people understand this simple but necessary idea, then real change would never occur, even if all the war criminals are hanged. I earnestly hope that people would soon be enlightened enough to realize that there is no real difference between the Islam of the 7th century and the Islam that Islamic terrorist organization practice today. Sadly, the very nature of Bangladesh has changed greatly. Ordinary people have been alarmingly indoctrinated into the ways of Islamists. Many more women are veiled, and more men go to mosques to pray than ever before. I lost the hopes I had for Bangladesh many years ago, but some of those were revived by the Shahbag movement. Shahbag movement is temporarily stopped because atheist organizers of the movement were attacked by the Islamists and arrested by the government. I truly hope that the Shahbag movement will soon begin again and turn into a positive political movement for a true democracy and a secular state, a state which affirms a strict separation between religion and state and maintains a uniform civil code, a set of secular laws that are not based on religion, but instead on equality, and an education system that is secular, scientific, and enlightened. A war is needed in Bangladesh, a war between two opposite ideas, secularism and fundamentalism. A war between rational, logical thinking and irrational, blind faith, between those who strive to move forwards and those who strain to push themselves backward. A war between modernism and barbarism, humanism and Islamism, between innovation and tradition, future and past, between those who value freedom and those who do not. I continue encouraging people of Bangladesh to transmute their nation into a secular nation without poverty, illiteracy, ignorance, superstitions, free of religionism, fanaticism, fascism, barbarism, a country without crimes and corruption. All sane and secular people should support the secular movement because it is a rare and immensely difficult movement in an Islamized country. I'm not sure whether they will eventually manage to have Jamaat-e-Islami proscribed, particularly because the Bangladesh government is likely to be afraid of losing the considerable financial support that come from the Islamic countries. Once a thriving community of vibrant, affectionate, creative people, this unfortunate country is now drowning in Islamism and may soon be submerged in the Indian Ocean. I also hope that if the Shahbag movement fails to achieve its goals now, the brave and enlightened people associated with it will not be permanently disillusioned or disheartened and will renew their efforts until their dreams come true. A trend must be set. People need to get angry. I'm painfully aware of the evil powers which once attempted to eliminate me and with whom the pro-Islamist government ultimately conspired to throw me out of Bangladesh, my own country, 20 years ago, never to allow me in again. Therefore, I know how much I would love to see hundreds of thousands of angry, passionate young people with a vision rise against the insanity of Islamists and guide to real change, a new era. Now, a few weeks ago, 500,000 Islamists gathered in the city of Dhaka where they set fire to shops and vehicles, killed police and ordinary people. Islamists or the protectors of Islam want to hang atheists. The government already arrested them for their crime of being atheists. But Islamists are not happy. They want to kill them. Their main agenda is to kill atheists or whoever criticizes Islam. They want anti-blasphemy law, the death penalty for blasphemy. They have other agendas to make Bangladesh Darul Islam, a land of Islam. Those 500,000 Islamists from an organization called Hefazat-e-Islam had 13-point demand. Number one, reinstatement of absolute trust and faith in Allah in the Constitution of Bangladesh, and abolishment of all laws which are in conflict with the values of the Quran and Sunnah. Number two, anti-defamation law to keep death penalty as the highest form of punishment to prevent defamation of Allah, Muhammad, and Islam, and prevent spreading hate against Muslims. Number three, immediate end to the negative propaganda by all atheist bloggers in a leading role in the so-called Shahbag movement who have defamed Allah, Muhammad, and Islam, and their exemplary punishment. Number four, end to all alien culture practices like immodesty, obscenity, misconduct, culture of free mixing of the sexes, candle lighting in the name of personal freedom and free speech. Number five, abolishment of the anti-Islamic inheritance law and the ungodly education policy, making Islamic education compulsory in all levels from primary to higher secondary, etc., etc. We clearly see that Almighty Allah is unable to protect himself and his religion. So the government and some Islamic organizations are working to protect Allah as well as Islam from the atheists. Almost all political parties in Bangladesh support Islam and Islamists. The government of Bangladesh has already taken action against whoever criticizes Islam. It looks like Muslims are desperate to protect Islam by any means. Islam turns into a handicapped religion which cannot survive without supports. Atheism should not be a crime. Blasphemy should be celebrated, not outlawed. In it, David Neos, the president of the Secular Coalition for America, reminds us of the obvious yet necessary point that atheism should not be criminalized. I quote him, "One of the many problems with the concept of protecting religion from defamation is that ideas, including religious ideas, cannot be defamed. Only people can be defamed. If governments feel that any idea must be shielded from scrutiny, questioning, or even ridicule and satirical commentary, that idea must be extremely weak, or alternatively, the society in question must be repressive. This is why blasphemy should not be criminalized, but celebrated. Those subversive individuals with the bad manners to remind us that no idea is sacred, that governmental defense of any theology necessarily weakens the legitimacy of both the government and the theology, should be thanked for making us think and for reminding us that we live in a free, open society. Non-believers are valuable contributors to society and deserve no inferiority complex or stigmatization, yet their government encourages it. Theistic supremacy is too often the official governmental line only because politicians find it easy to pander to religious voters by exalting religious belief. It may not be akin to throwing atheists in jail, but it still is not right." Unquote. Avijit Rai, a Bangladeshi blogger and the founder of the popular website called Muktomona, wrote, "There was a time in the 17th and 18th century in Europe when women who excelled in knowledge, science, and philosophy more than men were blamed for witchcraft and were burned alive by the churches and their theocratic government. Education and thus advancement for women has always been a threat for radicalism. So this is why the church and the government indulged in burning the progressive women by branding them as witches. Exactly the same situation is in Bangladesh right now. The whole new generation who brought in a revolution in Bengali blog community with their advancement in science, philosophy, and critical mind, who wrote against the religious fundamentalism and in favor of our great liberation war, freedom of speech, secularism, and democracy will be burned alive, just like witch hunt in the late Middle Ages. Atheists are now under attack, not only in Bangladesh, but in many other countries, especially in Muslim countries. Why do we have to save a charlatan called Muhammad for centuries? Why do we have to save Allah, a non-existing thing? Why do Muslims in the 21st century think it is their right to violate people's human rights and the right to freedom of expression? And why do the international community think they all should shut their mouth when enlightened atheists get jailed, banned, mutilated, exiled, and slaughtered for the sake of 7th century myths that are against democracy, human rights, and freedom of expression? We must condemn the attacks and threats against atheists, secularists, and free-thinking bloggers, and call on the Bangladesh government to guarantee their safety, respect free expression, and prosecute Islamists who threaten, attack, and harm critics. Freedom of expression, including to criticize Islam and Islamism, as well as to blaspheme, is a basic right. The barbaric and brutal anti-blasphemy law must be abolished. We all saw what happened in Boston Marathon. The Tsarnaev family started struggling since 40s. Joseph Stalin was their enemy. They were uprooted from their own land, Chechnya, and was forced to live in exile in Kyrgyzstan. There were ethnic minorities everywhere. Despite all their exiles and insecurities, good boys were sent to good schools to become better boys. They called themselves Muslims, but they were not practicing Muslims. They were not even veiled Muslims. Then Islam came in its crude form and destroyed everything. It brought blindness, veils, unreason. Good boys became bad boys. Very, very bad boys. They became terrorists. Religion is such a powerful evil. After reading the Quran, Tsarnaev brothers became religious terrorists. But after reading the Quran, I became an atheist. Some become harmless. Some become extremists, some terrorists. It is a very dangerous book. You never know what you would become if you read it, good or bad. You can read it, but it is better not to believe the words of the holy books, because there is no evidence that Allah or any other gods exist. Religions are all lies, and lies are always harmful. Like all other holy books, the Quran is full of lies, ignorance, and misogyny. Some Islamists brainwashed Tamerlan Tsarnaev to become a terrorist. Religion stopped his thinking mind. As the Quran asked to kill infidels or non-Muslims or kafirs, he has chosen to follow the orders of Allah and Muhammad. During my childhood, many people tried to brainwash me to become religious. I refused to become religious. I never prayed. I was a curious child. I always asked questions if I didn't understand something. I was 12 and I knew I was an atheist. It was easy for me to become an atheist. I was a student of science, so it was hard for me to accept that the sun moves around the earth and the moon has its own light, and that the purpose of mountains is to support the earth so that it will not fall down. I came to suspect that the Quran was not written by someone who had any knowledge of science. As I grew up in Bangladesh, I realized that like other religions, Islam is not compatible with human rights women's rights, freedom of expression, and democracy. There is no way in a real democracy that separation of religion and state can be neglected. There is no way we can enjoy human rights if we allow religious rules to regulate society. Freedom of expression must include the right to be different and to offend people, a fact most of the people in many countries do not know and do not believe. Without the right to offend, freedom of expression cannot exist. And without having freedom of expression, a democracy cannot be a true democracy. As I grew up, I became aware of women's human rights. I believed that Islam doesn't consider women to be a separate human being. Man was the original creation, and womankind was created secondarily for the pleasure of man. Islam treats women intellectually, morally, and physically as inferior. In marriage, Islam protects the rights of men and men only. The Quran gives total freedom to men, saying, "Your women are as your field, go unto them as you will." Women are told to run to their husbands wherever they are, whatever they do, it is their duty. The Hadith says that 2 prayers that never reach the heavens are, number 1, those of the escaping slaves, and number 2, those of the reluctant women who frustrate their husbands at night. Islam considers women psychologically inferior. Women's testimony is not allowed in cases of marriage and divorce. If any woman is raped, she has to produce 4 male witnesses to the court. If she can't, there is no charge against the rapists. In Islamic law, the testimony of 2 women is worth that of 1 man. In the case in which a man suspects his wife of adultery or denies the legitimacy of the offspring, his testimony is worth that of 4 witnesses. A woman does not have the right to charge her husband in a similar manner. Women are not allowed to inherit the property on equal terms with their brothers. In the case of inheritance, Allah says, "A male shall inherit twice as much as a female." And after all the rights and freedoms, after obtaining all the sexual pleasure and having the pleasure of being the master, men will be rewarded with wine, food, and 72 virgins in paradise, including the wives they had on the earth. Allah said, "They relax on luxurious furnishing, and we match them with beautiful virgins. Near them shall be blushing virgins with large, beautiful eyes, who will be like hidden pearls." And what is the reward for the pious women? Nothing. Nothing but the same old husband, the same man who caused her suffering when they were on earth. As I grew up, I kept observing the condition of women in our society. My mother was an oppressed woman. She had been given into marriage when she was a child. She was a good student in school, but she was not allowed to continue her studies. My grandfather did not want her to study. He wanted her to be a good housewife, a good mother, a good caretaker. That's all. Education was only for boys. Growing up, I had to maintain the belief that girls certainly must be inferior to boys, for boys could play in a big field, whereas girls had to play with their dolls in a corner of the house. My brothers could go anywhere they wanted, could watch any games, could play anything they wanted to play. I couldn't. My sister could not. I was told that girls were not made for such activities, that their role was to stay home, learn how to cook, make beds, clean the house. My mother was not the only woman who was oppressed. I saw my aunts, my neighbors, and other acquaintances who were playing the same roles, and they too were oppressed. In our mind, torture of women is not oppression, but rather as tradition. We become accustomed to tradition. As I grew up, I realized that I was a part of that tradition, and also that I was likewise being oppressed the same as my female classmates and later my female patients. By the way, I studied medicine and became a medical doctor. Writing was my passion. I became a full-time professional writer later. In Bangladesh, in the beginning of 90s, hundreds of thousands of Islamists burned my books publicly and demanded my execution by hanging. Fatwas were issued against me. They set price on my head. Instead of taking action against the Islamists, the government took action against me. Filed cases against me, the government filed cases against me on the charges of blasphemy. And finally, I was thrown out of my country. My crime was that I said, it is dangerous to follow the religious scriptures in this modern world. Not only the Quran, but all the religious scriptures are out of time and out of place, and they are all anti-women. Sometimes I feel that if I only opposed religion and did not oppose patriarchal misogynistic system, I would not have been thrown out of my country. In this wide world, I have no country to call my own. The country where I was born and raised has abandoned me. I'm left with memories of a land and people that are intrinsic parts of my being, whose language and culture molded me. It has been 20 years now that I have not been allowed to return to my country. Even when my mother was on her deathbed, the Bangladesh government told me I could not return. A few years after that, when my father lay dying, I begged, pleaded, and cried to be allowed to see him, if only for 2 days. The government refused to permit me to enter my country. After living my exile life in Europe and America for a decade, I moved to India. In India too, fatwas or Islamic religious edicts have been issued against me. I was physically attacked by Muslim fundamentalists, received numerous death threats, witnessed violent protests against my writings in different cities, and witnessed hundreds of burning vehicles, bloodthirsty mobs, and madness. The threats do not necessarily always come from fanatics. Unfortunately, they come also from the leftist intellectuals. Most of them defend Islam as being India's minority religion. They have no problem if Muslim women's human rights are constantly violated, and of course those intellectuals consider themselves as defender of human rights. In India, women have been victims of female feticide, dowry murder, bride burning, gang rape, slave trade, sexual slavery, domestic violence, etc. It is one of the most dangerous countries for women. I am trying my best to fight all kinds of discrimination against women by raising awareness. By supporting women's rights everywhere, I have criticized all kinds of anti-women religions, tradition, cultures, and customs. But to my surprise, I am labeled as being anti-Islam. This has led to some people saying that I am a Muslim hater. But they are wrong. By no means am I a Muslim hater. I always stand beside oppressed people. I stood beside Muslims when they were oppressed in Gujarat, in India, in Palestine, and in Bosnia. I defended their rights to live, just as I stood beside the Hindus who were oppressed in Bangladesh and Christians in Pakistan. To me, their religious identity is not important. I consider them as human beings. Nobody should be oppressed because of their beliefs. The criticism I make of the religions, I do by writings. I do not go to harm the believers physically. I do not believe in violence. The fanatics never accept the idea to have a dialogue or debate with me, or write articles or books opposing me. They come to kill me, for they are convinced by their belief in their religion that an apostate must be killed. Still, people like to believe that Islam is a religion of peace. But since my childhood, I have witnessed the opposite. I believe no country can become civilized without criticizing the dogmatic practices of its religions. Without separating state and religion, no state or society can become modern. Should Islam continue to be untouchable? Many Western intellectuals who are enjoying secularism in their own country are not agreeing to criticize Islamic oppression of women for fear it might hurt the religious sentiment of Muslims. But should it remain how it is? And should women continue to suffer? Without criticism of Islam, it would never be possible for Islamic countries to completely separate state and religion, never possible to completely secularize the society. And if such didn't happen, Islamic states would remain in darkness forever. Women would not enjoy the right to live as human beings. The fear of offending Muslims and the Islamic world has kept Islam away from the type of critical scrutiny applied to other religions. In the West, people are scared of the Muslim radicals, but at the same time, they do not want to be seen taking a critical stand that might project them as anti-Muslims. They are also afraid of being called racists and Islamophobes. It is amazing to see the amount of energy civilized world spends to protect Muslims from questioning the unethical social practices of Islam. We all were excited for Arab Revolution, but are we happy at the end? The corrupt dictator stayed in the power for decades, but did not secularize the countries, rather looted money and exploited people. Dictators will be gone, but it seems Islamists are coming into power. Secularists are too small minority to fight Islamists. My fear is the Islamists will replace democracy with theocracy, introduce Sharia laws, and force women to be covered with the darkness of burqa and stone numerous women to death. Women are deprived of their democratic rights in many countries, especially in Muslim countries. Democracy means nothing if it fails to provide equal rights to women. Ensuring women's rights benefits not only women, but also the men and children in their families and their societies as a whole. It also strengthens democracy, strengthens prosperity, enhances stability, and encourages tolerance. Protecting both the human and property rights of women and of all people is at the core of building a civil, law-abiding society, the foundation for true democracy. Empowering women through equal access to education and economic opportunity is essential for the eradication of poverty and enables women to participate effectively in the decision-making processes that shape their lives. Education is increasingly essential if individuals are to succeed in a global and technologically advanced economy. Women's integration into the mainstream of economic life leads not only to significant economic progress for the family, but ultimately for the country as well. In Muslim countries, this movement is emerging, but very timidly. It has the uphill task of fighting religious laws and the introduction of a uniform civil code. So far, it tends to be constituted by a few individual feminists who are forced to compromise with religionists. For women's status to change, we also need enlightened leaders who believe in equality. In countries such as mine, women with a strong voice do not have the support of political leaders, whether they be men or women. Look at the countries in which women are in politics or even heads of state. Does it follow that women in those countries are emancipated? Because of long-standing vested interests, such leaders continue to back measures that oppress women. They are not ideologically committed to changing this condition. In South Asia, most of the women who become heads of state are religious or pretend to be religious to stay in the power. And like men, they adhere to the religious objectives of the establishment. I am the victim of a country where the prime minister is a woman and the main opposition leader is also a woman. Because I went one step too far in denouncing religion and the oppression that it keeps women under, I was forced to leave my country. I have seen women oppose me when I talk about women's rights. Some women say that God does not want women to have equal rights, so women must not have equal rights. Or some other women say that equality is not really a good idea. Men are physically stronger than women, so men deserve much better treatment than women. I have met many men who are against what is said in the religious scriptures, and they believe in equality between men and women. Gender has nothing to do with this belief. It depends on one's conscience. Muslim women who are wearing the veil and glorifying their subservience are obviously not going to better the lives of the oppressed. Until a society is based on secularism and women are considered equal to men before the law, I do not think that only women's participation in politics will be able to automatically advance the cause of women. Since I started writing in the 80s, people blaming me, saying that I was influenced by Western feminism. Let alone Western feminism, I had no idea about Eastern feminism. Without any familiarity with these concepts, I have since childhood questioned a lot of diktat, advice, and prescriptions from the family and from society at large. When I, unlike my brothers, was not allowed to play outside, when I was called impure during my menstruation periods, or when I was told by some of my relatives and neighbors that I had grown up and must cover myself completely in a burqa if I wanted to step out, I questioned. I didn't give in readily. I did not follow their orders. When strange boys would hurl abuses at me, snatch my scarf, or pinch my breasts as I walked by, I protested. I could not stomach it when I saw husbands beating their wives, young mothers weeping in anxiety and fear, having given birth to a baby girl. Upon observing the shame on the faces of raped women, I felt their pain acutely. I broke down when I heard about women and children being trafficked from city to city, from one country to another in order to be forced into prostitution. Nothing could make me accept the torture of women by the man, the society, the state. But no one witnessed my pain, my tears, the non-acquiescence, the non-acceptance, the speechlessness, the inability to tolerate, the screams, the logic and reason, that is, until I started writing. The society that I grew up in engendered questions in the minds of many. They were forced to accept the answers given by the leaders of the patriarchy. I did not accept the answers. No one taught me to be disobedient. I did not learn defiance from a book. It is not necessary to read thick and heavy books to be aware. One just needs eyes to observe. No one helps build courage either. In order to demand rights for women, one does not need to internalize Simone de Beauvoir or Gloria Steinem. One's own awareness is often good enough. If I am hungry, I shall eat. If I am lashed, I shall wrest away the lash. If I am oppressed, I shall stand up. These sentiments are universal. Feminism is not a property of the West. It is the arduous struggle by abused, oppressed, tortured, disrespected, ignored women coming together, putting their lives at stake for the sake of their rights. I learned that women of the West also had no less than their share of sufferings. Abused and bloodied, they had their backs to the wall. They have screamed. Centuries upon centuries, they have been victims of patriarchy, religion, misogynistic traditions, and so forth. just like their Eastern counterparts. Religious fanatics have burned them alive. Misogynistic traditions have imposed metallic cages on their bodies in the name of chastity. They have been turned into sex slaves. East or west, north or south, women still suffer for the crime of being women. Human rights are universal. Those who talk about separate human rights for the East and seek to distance themselves from the universal human rights, assuming that this stance represents a victory over the prolonged oppression by the West, actually end up harming the East more than the West. A recurrent question that is often raised claims that I have hurt religious sentiments. Feminism has long opposed religion. Religion is patriarchal through and through. You cannot believe in a religion and acknowledge women's rights at the same time. Whenever religion-motivated abuse of women has been challenged in order to uphold women's rights, immediately the slogan, "religious sentiments must not be hurt," has been raised by those that are anti-democracy, anti-free speech, and opposed to women's independence. They want to uphold their Eastern culture or religious cultures that discriminates against women. Culture, however, I don't refer to any kind of barbarism as culture. I believe what Grayling says, religion is one of the biggest impediments to peace and human progress, and one of the most destructive forces plaguing humanity. Humans invented gods to fill a gap in knowledge. Most of that gap is gone now, and soon the gods will be gone too. But until then, we have to suffer a lot. I'm a Bengali. I have no right to live in Bangladesh and West Bengal. West Bengal is part of India, the lands where my fellow Bengalis live. I'm not only banished from those lands, I'm also banned and blacklisted. Many of my books are banned, and I'm prevented from my writings get published in Bengal. I have no home. I'm still moving from one country to another only to find a home. I have no home, but I believe people who bravely oppose the forces of darkness and ignorance are my true home. The hearts of people are my home and my only safe haven, my shelter and my refuge. There is no place in this world that I can call my home, but the people who support me, sympathize with me, and express solidarity with me, they are my home. They are my country. The love I receive from atheists, freethinkers, secularists, humanists is my home. The love I receive from you, that is my home. I do not regret for anything that I have ever written, come what may. I will continue my struggle against all the extremists, fundamentalists, and intolerant forces without any compromise until my death. I will never be silenced. I'm all the more committed to my cause. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.